Hello and welcome to the History of Southern Rhodesia, Episode 2, Pre-Colonial Zimbabwe. In this episode, I shall be examining pre-colonial Zimbabwe, its knowledge of and relationship with the rest of Africa and with European merchants, conquerors and colonizers. Before continuing, I feel it is necessary to clarify certain key points. Firstly, I shall be using pre-colonial Zimbabwe as a geographical term, albeit with political annotations. The word Zimbabwe comes from a Shona term for great stone houses, as in the city-state we call Great Zimbabwe, which dominated, but not as we in the era of the nation-state would understand it, control much of the territory of what is now Zimbabwe. And Great Zimbabwe is but the first state to astride the territory. It had its successors and inheritors. It is them and how they interacted with each other and the world that I will be talking about today. The second point is one of terminology. Rhodesia was a colonial invention, although surprisingly enough not of Rhodes' own coining, but more on that later. I shall be referring to what is now Zimbabwe as Rhodesia only in the context of colonial rule. Before colonial rule, it should be referred to as pre-colonial Zimbabwe, and afterwards only as Zimbabwe. Thirdly, and finally, I must apologise in advance for what's probably going to be me butchering a lot of the pronunciations of indigenous words. I do apologise for that. I will do the best I can. And with that important bit of clarification finished, it's time to properly start this narrative history. Any history of Southern Rhodesia, be it under company rule or in any later company rule, colonial rule, or in any other period post our full narrative, cannot be undertaken without at least some understanding of pre-colonial Zimbabwe. The territory that became Southern Rhodesia was not some sort of empty terra nullius, as was the common idea of settlers in Africa across the world when it came to the territory they colonised. On the contrary, it was a diverse land of tribes, clans, king groups, petty kingdoms and stateless, and some mighty empires, along with fully functioning kingdoms such as the medieval society based on the city of Great Zimbabwe, of a similar sophistication to any contemporary medieval European state, with people working iron and gold and living in stone houses. Built by the Kalanga people, Great Zimbabwe would thrive as the centre of regional power based around agriculture, glassworking, and precious metal mining, connected to the wider world by a Swahili-speaking Islamic mercantile elite that operated across Africa. But the wealth of Great Zimbabwe invited challenge, and whilst it was powerful enough to withstand local rivals for a time, it eventually gave way to the kingdom of here's that pronunciation problem, Mutapa, which, whilst controlling much of the same area as the old Great Zimbabwe, had its particular capital in the kingdom of Zavongombe. Again, my pronunciation is awful. We'll have to work through this together. Practicing an indigenous form of monotheism, worshipping the supreme deity Morari, abandoned the natural resources including golden ore, and connected via the same Islamic merchants into a pan-African trading network, it was a thriving civilization. Again, not much different in terms of scope or magnitude to contemporary late medieval, early modern European states. These were not primitive savages. These were people just the same as the rest of the world. But change was coming, and the world was coming to Zimbabwe, and it came in the form of the Portuguese, whose newborn empire carried across the seas and oceans, was starting to penetrate inland into southern and central Africa, destined for gold, carrying the Bible, and armed with the latest weaponry decades and centuries of intersouthern European conflict had produced. The fascinating history of the Portuguese Empire is not the focus of this episode, or indeed this series. While said empire will re-emerge periodically as it interacts with British metropolitan and colonial interests in southern Africa. For now, the focus must remain on the arrival of on what the arrival, of the Portuguese meant for pre-colonial Zimbabwe. Starting in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, Portuguese colonisation of southwest and southeast Africa was driven by a desire to control the trade routes to India, the Indonesian archipelago, and to China, to control the rich resources of Africa itself, and to continue the centuries-long Reconquista, that is, the Christian conquest / reconquest of Iberia from the Islamic states who had dominated for a long time, by fighting the influence of Islamic states around the Indian Ocean, and also the influence of Islamic states inland from that. For the Matupa kingdom, with its riches and Muslim Swahili merchants, conflict with the Portuguese was, if not inevitable, at least very likely given these commercial, religious, and nationalist glory ideas that were driving the Portuguese imperial adventure, as it were. Distance, climate, and the technology of the time meant that their influence was limited. A punitive expedition here, a church built there, a gift of gold or silver won with the aid of Portugal's marines, marked the extent of the involvement of the Portuguese in inland southern Africa. Of course, most of their settlement and involvement was for the longest time on the coast, which was much easier to settle. And it did not match either their rapid rise to predominance in the Indian Ocean or in the East Indies, where Portuguese ships, and particularly shipborne artillery, dominated the competition. But for all the limits of their expeditionary power, the Portuguese shook the Matupa kingdom so much that it broke. The fragility of medieval and early modern states and their vulnerability to major upheaval should not be underestimated, and will in fact play a major part in our story going forward. By the early 18th century, conflict with the Portuguese and other African states who saw the Matupa's weakness caused the collapse of the kingdom and the rise of another state in the Zimbabwe territory, the militaristic Rhodesia Empire. Its name comes from a Shona word meaning plunder. This was a militant, militarized state, and far more invested in warfare than those that had preceded it. Still, it would take an even more militant state, led by an even mightier warlord, to set the stage for the conquest of pre-colonial Zimbabwe by the British South Africa Company. And that man was the great, and perhaps possibly infamous, Shaka Zulu, whose brilliance was only matched, or possibly even exceeded, by his ruthlessness. Leading the Zulu nation of Southeast Africa on a campaign of military dominance so far-reaching and brutal that its isiZulu name, McKeffin, again, apologies, well, its name means the crushing in English, to give you just an example of what we're talking about here, occurring between 1815 and 1840. The massive change this campaign caused are, again, beyond the scope of the series, although it must be noted that the geopolitical landscape that was around in pre-colonial Zimbabwe and southern Africa in 1890, when southern Rhodesia was established, was a direct result of the upheaval caused by the crushing. His empire, however, never reached Zimbabwe, but then again, he and it didn't need to. The techniques and methods of warfare and campaigning he had taught, devastating though they were not complex. And for all his power, Shaka Zulu still had rivals, enemies, and those who felt their ambitions were constrained by the influence of the mighty ruler. Into this last category fell one of his generals. This general, a commander named Milikaze, led an offshoot of the main Zulu tribe, known as the Amandebele, across the Limpopo River. Is now today the southern border of modern Zimbabwe. In the process, he conquered or vassalized the various local Shona groups who had succeeded the by this point declining Rhodesia Empire. The Shona, by the way, are to this day the dominant ethnic group in Zimbabwe, and that later on their colonies with their conflicts, I should say, with the descendants of the Abmandible will be a major part of our post-narrative story. This was occurring throughout the 1860s until his death. In the process, the Zulu offshoot, the Abmandible, became known as the Mdeble. It was subsequently anglicised as Matabele, and they gave their name to the new territory, Matabeleland. It was Melekaze's son, the tall and imposing Lobengula, who would turn out to be the last indigenous ruler of the Ndebele people, and more widely speaking, the last major independent ruler of pre-colonial Zimbabwe. While other rulers existed in the territory, none could compare in power and importance to him. Although caricatured as a brute and tyrant who ruled with an iron fist, and to be honest, Lobengula was a military king of military people, he was not ignorant of the situation his kingdom was in when Charles Rudd came to him with a commercial mining contract in 1888. Keenly aware of the division between Britain and Belgium to the south and alert to the firepower at the disposal of Europeans, he felt peace was his best option. The extent of this desire can be seen by the manner he forbid any warrior of his kingdom to harm any European in any capacity on pain of death. He even, although this is a story that he told in detail in a later episode, tried to enter into diplomatic negotiations with Queen Victoria, although it never came to anything. But for all Lobengula's knowledge and for all his strength, he wasn't just facing Charles Rudd and some eager prospectors hunting for mineral wealth. Rudd was a local factor of a Cape Colony businessman, politician, and white supremacist, British imperialist named Cecil Rhodes. Next time on the history of Southern Rhodesia, we shall get to know Cecil Rhodes and examine who he was, what he wanted, what he did, and what it meant for the history of Southern Rhodesia, and more generally, the wider world. Thank you.